Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. We're going to take a look at one of the articles from one of the past issues of Creation Magazine, which is the flagship publication of our ministry, Creation Ministries International. And a lot of different topics, a lot of different ideas covered in the magazine. Some of them are pretty serious, and I think today's article you've chosen is going to prove to be one of those challenging ones.
It's called Darwin's Yard Apes. A deadly hurricane exposes an even deadlier philosophy. If you're here in North America, many of you will remember Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and this is from the March to May 2006 issue. I say that because it's referenced here right at the beginning of the article. This is by Gary DeMar. After the destructive 2005 Hurricane Katrina in southern USA, many evacuees from the devastated city of New Orleans sought refuge in other cities. Most were African American. An official of the Greenville Technical College twice referred to the recent arrivals in Greenville, South Carolina as yard apes. The college immediately removed the offending employee and said, quote, "She's not a member of this institution today," said the Greenville Tech president, Tom Barton. As we might expect, there was outrage at the comments, and rightly so. How can someone in the 21st century believe such nonsense? School officials and representatives from the NAACP should dig a little deeper into the curriculum of the public school system that they blindly support. There they will find the scientific justification for the yard ape distinction for blacks in the writings of Charles Darwin.
Right.
Consider the subtitle to Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. It reads, "Or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life." Darwin's supporters claim that his use of the word races was meant to describe subspecies of animals. To a certain degree, this is correct.
Right.
But what did Darwin mean by this? And what if Darwin thought non-whites as an animal race or subspecies? In The Descent of Man, Darwin wrote, The Descent of Man is another book of Charles Darwin written after Origin of Species. At some future period, not very distant, as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. At the same time, the anthropomorphous apes, that is, the ones which allegedly look like people, will no doubt be exterminated. The break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider, for it will intervene between man and For it will intervene between man in a more civilized state, as we may hope, even than the Caucasian, and some ape as low as the baboon, instead of, as now, between the Negro or Australian, talking about Aboriginal, and the gorilla. That's where the quote ends.
Right.
Interesting. Sad.
Yeah, because really what he's stating there is there's a progression, right? You go from the ape, you go from the ape to something primitive, a primitive type of person like an Aboriginal Australian, and then of course you get to the highly evolved Caucasian race of which he was part. So he must have been the top of the heap.
In this prophecy here, the civilized races of man. He's talking about Caucasians, white people, and so on.
Yeah.
They'll eliminate the darker-skinned folks and some of the apes that look the most like people.
Right.
And then there will be a wider gap between man and the animals.
Right.
Interesting. Darwin believed that the various races were at different evolutionary levels, all distant from the apes, with blacks lower and whites, Caucasians, Europeans, at the top. Thomas Huxley, an ardent defender of Darwin, who garnered the nickname Darwin's Bulldog, wrote that no rational man, cognizant of the facts, believes that the average Negro is equal, still less the superior, of the white man, end quote. Huxley described whites as bigger-brained and smaller-jawed. Richard Hofstadter, in Social Darwinism in American Thought, demonstrated that quote, Darwinism was one of the chief sources of racism and of a belligerent ideology which characterized the last half of the 19th century in Europe and America, end quote. Benjamin Wilker comments that according to Darwin, the, quote, European race, following the inevitable laws of natural selection, will emerge as a distant species, human being, and all the transitional forms, such as the gorilla, chimpanzee, Negro, Australian Aborigine, and so on, will be extinct, end quote.
So there, you know, I've had conversations with evolutionists, and you know, it's so obvious what the connotations here are, right? We're more human than
Yes.
you are, and so when you bring up this link between Darwinism and evolution, sometimes you get quite a hostile reaction. No, that's not what Darwin taught, and he was a great guy, and all this kind of stuff. There are clear links here. And there's enough documentation, and you know, even Stephen Jay Gould, who was an evolutionist, he was very honest. He said, sure, there was racism before Darwinism, but after Darwinism, racism increased in leaps and bounds because now there was scientific justification for believing,
Right.
well, I'm better
Yes.
than you are, I'm more human than you are, and the justification was scientific in that sense. And there's, you know, these aren't just isolated quotes. They're riddled through the evolutionary literature, especially in the early part.
Yes, in years gone by, we should probably hasten to add here that modern evolutionists are generally not racist.
Right.
They're you know, that is of course now not politically correct. Perhaps as it was back in that time, it was still fashionable to think that way.
However, I use a quote in my talk on so-called races when I'm out speaking from a gentleman from one of the universities here in Ontario in Canada, very short period of time ago, who wrote a book.
Yes.
And he actually classified, you know, the races along an evolutionary scale, with Asians at the top and blacks at the bottom, and said blacks are more promiscuous and have a smaller, like less intelligence, and this is from a university professor. This was in 2000.
This is like current.
Very, you know, within 10 years,
book.
I believe.
Yes.
And of course, I remember going down to the Science Center in Toronto, and there was David Suzuki, who was an ardent evolutionist, and he was chastising this guy, saying, this guy is crazy, and how can he be doing this? But really, I didn't see the consistencies there between what Dr. Suzuki was saying. If he believes evolution is true, and this guy's just you know, classifying races along an evolutionary scale, well, that's kind of consistent, but it isn't politically correct, is it? To you know, racism is not politically correct.
Right. Yes.
But let's face it, we see enough TV shows, and you know, whenever you see a dark-skinned person and somebody, you know, says some kind of monkey comment, or you're watching a show. I remember watching Remember the Titans, and you know, the white-skinned coach flips the black-skinned coach a banana.
Yeah.
The direct links are there. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's just so obvious.
Yeah. The article continues. Of course, Darwinism did not lay the groundwork for racism itself. Racism has been around for a long time, but Darwinianism made it plausibly scientific, made it seem plausibly scientific. Right. It's good to see that the Greenville Technical College did some house cleaning. Now it's time to take a serious look at the entire system that promotes a scientific theory that can be used to justify racism. As Scott Bell argues in The Darwin Conspiracy, if we are all biological accidents, which Darwin teaches, why shouldn't the white accidents own and sell the black accidents?
Right.
Kind of an interesting question to end the article with.
Yeah, well, he's obviously just talking about the, you know, slave trade and those dark pieces of history where, again, people were using, you know, people could use a scientific justification for that today in that sense.
Yeah. According to the Bible, we all come from the Tower of Babel. It's easy to understand racism, and you can check out creation.com for more information on that.